True cases.
Division of Public Police engages in a pattern and practice of using excessive force.
Real victims.
No, he's not all right. They were pounding him in the head.
Examined by two experienced investigators.
Police cars shouldn't say to protect and serve, or they should be adding themselves on the bottom. It should say to protect and serve ourselves.
The missed clues.
Austin School Police acknowledging today that they should have done more to investigate.
The cover-ups.
It was a cover-up, and I think that people were looking out for their own skin.
From the extensive work by Salvatore Restrelli and Ira Robbins comes the Archangels of Justice case files. I am your host, Joe Rost, and I will be your guide on this quest to find the answers and give a voice to the victims of these tragic cases. Thank you for joining me today for the next episode of the Archangels of Justice case files. This is part 2 of a multi-part series looking into the death of Sheena Morris. If you've not heard the first episode, then I recommend you start there and pick up hereafter. If you're someone that likes to hear things out of order or don't care, then by all means, keep listening. I also want to give a big thank you to our listeners. We had a great response from the first episode, so please show us your support by leaving us a review on the platform of your choice. It really helps us grow and allows other people to find this podcast. Before we get started, here's a quick message from our sponsors. Do you want to launch your own podcast or host your own media? Then you should be looking at blueberry.com. That's BLUBRRY.com. With no third-party sites to log into, you remain in control by never leaving your website and having an iTunes and SoundCloud-friendly RSS feed. Get your 30-day free trial by just typing AoJ podcast when you check out, and you could be broadcasting your very own media today. Did you know that approximately 95% of purchase decisions are made on the first pages of search engines? TotalFrontPage.com knows this, and they can do what no other digital marketing company does. Put your company name in the autocomplete box of Google and Bing, so that searchers see your business before they see any other company. Your business will appear in most, if not all, organic listings. No competitors, just you. If you'd like to know more about this groundbreaking service, you can check out their website, TotalFrontPage.com. Or for a free consultation, mention AoJ Podcast in the subject line when you email info@TotalFrontPage.com. Act today, because once these search terms are purchased, they cannot be used by any other company. Thank you to our sponsors. And now I present episode 2 of the Sheena Morris case. For this episode, I will be joined by multiple guests, including Kelly Osborne, Sheena's mother, Dave Morris, Sheena's father, Lee Williams, who is a reporter that covered this case for the local newspaper, the Sarasota Herald Tribune, and our 2 Archangels, Sal and Ira. This episode will cover the days following Sheena's death. It is now January 2nd, and Sheena's grandmother, still shocked about the news from the night before, pulls up to Kelly's home. When she does, she sees Genoese, who stayed at the house after learning of Sheena's death, getting a suitcase out of his car. This is the same suitcase he took to Bradenton Beach with Sheena. I had Kelly talk a little bit about this story.
It was my mother, Sheena's grandmother, who was very upset because what had happened was he had stayed that night after we learned on the 1st, which was a Thursday, that Sheena had passed. So obviously, just going through just a lot of silence and disbelief. The next morning, my mother comes back over to the house, and as she pulls up, she notices Genoese going to his vehicle, opening the trunk, and pulling out his suitcase. And the reason this disturbed my mother so much is that had he already been home, like he claimed, why would he still have that suitcase from being in Anna Maria Island still in his vehicle? That just seems very strange. If he had been home, like he said, then wouldn't you need things the next morning, your toothbrush and shaving things and clothes the next day? So here it was. That's Friday morning. And so I guess he didn't have his belongings at home like he says he was at home.
To clear up what Kelly is getting at, Genoese lives about an hour away and had not gone back to his house since learning of Sheena's death. But when Genoese originally drove to Kelly's, the police had not informed the family. Genoese, who told police and Sheena's family that he went straight home after the fight with Sheena and didn't leave, would not have had a need to pack a suitcase to stay the night at Kelly's, unless A, he knew Sheena was already dead, or B, lied about where he went after the fight with Sheena. Either way, something didn't add up to the family. Then, to top it all off, Kelly later heard this story.
Now, that same day is the same day he is also seen at a local strip club having cocktails on that same day.
That morning, Kelly speaks with the medical examiner, who informs her that they will be doing an autopsy on Sheena later in the afternoon and would call back when it was complete. Kelly was hoping this call would provide some clarity into what had happened to her daughter, because Detective Diaz was not telling her anything.
Prior to me knowing what happened to Sheena or the manner of death, anything, I had called the detective and I had asked him questions such as, where was she found? And he would explain, in the shower. I asked if water was running. They said no. I asked where her cell phone was, and they said it was in the other room of the hotel. And they never said anything about a leash. They never said anything about a hanging, absolutely nothing. So all that night, all I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, did she slip and fall and hit her head? Did she have an aneurysm? Nothing to like what I was going to wind up hearing.
In the afternoon, as friends start to gather at Kelly's home, Sheena's stepfather leaves to go to the airport to pick up Sheena's father, Dave Morris, who was flying in from New York with his girlfriend and Sheena's other grandmother. I talked to Dave about his trip to Florida and his reaction to finding out about Sheena's death.
The very next morning, I caught a flight and flew down to Tampa. Sheena's stepfather, Kevin, had called me, and I'm sure he was probably still in shock, but he just called me, and I picked up the phone, and he said, Dave, Sheena's dead. You might want to get some plans made to come down here. And it was obviously shocking for all of us, but that's how it was put to me. I was never contacted by police.
When they arrive at Kelly's home, they see quite a few of Sheena's friends who've shown up to pay their respects. Sheena's friends and family are extremely saddened by her passing, but they have no idea that Bradenton Beach police thought Sheena had committed suicide because no one has told the family about the details of Sheena's death. Meanwhile, Genoese is telling Sheena's friends and loved ones how crazy Sheena was that night and was acting as a host as people arrived. I asked Kelly about what she saw and heard during that emotional day.
So people started gathering when they came to the home. Genoese would answer the door. He was basically acting like our host. People would come in the door. He'd offer them something to drink or eat. And one of my friends explained that when he opened up the door, he just said to them, God, she was just crazy. She was just impossible last night. And they just found that very odd that was, what he was doing. And he's walking around much more capable than what we were able to do in trying to digest the news that we just heard, on top of, people coming by to check in on us. And there were times where when there were people there, he would pick up a framed picture and carry it around of the two of them. It really just kind of felt like more of a little show, because he just didn't seem visibly shaken that we just lost Sheena.
Later in the afternoon, while friends and family are still gathered at Kelly's home, a call comes in from the medical examiner, Dr. Suzanne Utley, who performed the autopsy on Sheena's body. Dr. Utley informs Kelly that the autopsy has been completed and that it is consistent with a suicide by hanging. Kelly is shocked by this information. Suicide was the last thing on her mind.
The medical examiner was calling at a certain time, and we were waiting for that call. And when she called, she just outwardly came up and said, well, your daughter's death is consistent with a hanging. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And I'm in total shock. that was the first time I spoke to her. And when I was so shocked, she said, "Well, wait a minute. They didn't tell you? The detective didn't tell you?" And I said, "No, this is the first I'm hearing any of this." I was walking around the house and we had the sliding glass doors open to the pool and lanai area. And I just started kicking the chairs into the pool and just in total disbelief while Genoese sat there with absolutely no expression, no shock, nothing.
Dr. Utley is obviously taken aback by Kelly's reaction as well, since Detective Diaz told her it was a clear suicide when he brought in Sheena's body. If Detective Diaz was so sure about suicide, then why did he not give this information to Sheena's family? I asked Sal and Ira about Detective Diaz's statements when he closed this case.
6 days before Diaz interviewed Genoese, he wrote his official report, and at that time he closed it, and he claimed that he had already interviewed Genoese and Kelly Osborne, and that he's looked at all the evidence collected. The report that he filed says, "I have no reason to believe that there was any foul play involving the domestic disturbance the night before Morris. Sheena was discovered." That statement is absolute proof that Diaz is either incompetent or has falsified his report to cover up the dereliction of duty, the misconduct, and the false report of Officer Priscilla Descari.
I'm sorry. No, because listening to you tell what he wrote makes me want to laugh, and not in a humorous way, but the fact that the man is a fool because he looked at all the evidence. What evidence? They never proved Sheena walked into that shower. They were so derelict in their duty, they didn't even bother examining the tile floor for her footprints that would have clearly shown up on the floor had she walked on that floor or if someone
Julie,
dragged her in the shower.
I would like to take a moment to talk about suicide, because this is the biggest question surrounding this entire case, and unfortunately, it is very common in the world today. Suicide is a terrible thing, and it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. To further understand this topic, we looked at multiple studies done by the American Association of Suicidology. These were some of the takeaways we found significant to this case. There are 33 attempts at suicide for every one success, and in young people aged 15 to 24, the odds are 150 to 1 against, and women are 3 times less likely to be successful than men when attempting suicide. Men with a history of mental issues were more likely to commit suicide by hanging, but women with mental issues were half as likely to hang themselves compared to women without a history of depression. In the US, of the 38,000 people who took their own lives in 2010, 79% were men. Women who attempt suicide tend to use nonviolent means, such as overdosing. Men often use firearms or hanging, which is more likely to result in death. So according to the statistics provided by the American Association of Suicidology, the odds are against Sheena committing suicide. And while it's possible Sheena took her life, I do not understand how Detective Diaz or the Bradenton Beach Police can make that determination before at least talking to Sheena's friends and family to ask if she was depressed or had shown signs before they closed their investigation. To learn more about this police department, I talked to Lee Williams, a former police officer and the senior investigative reporter for the Herald Tribune in Sarasota, Florida, who has been covering this case since 2012. I asked him about the Bradenton Beach Police and his experience with them.
They've never had a case like this. They're not a very active police department. If you look at some of their enforcement actions, they're quite low. A lot of officers at major departments their self-initiated activities tracked. You know, the cars they stop, the arrests they make. Bradenton Beach is kind of live and let live. Like I said, it's like it reminds me of the town in Jaws. And the way they treated their police department when the shark arrived. Don't cause any fuss. Don't cause any muss. The worst thing we want to do is upset the tourists so they don't come. Let's keep everything under the rug. It's not like a professional police department. You've got some guys that'll go out and do some patrol. Once this thing broke, I started getting calls from poor Bradenton Beach residents, completely unrelated to Sheena, talking about their interactions with the police department. I bet I fielded 50 of those calls. Not one of them was supportive of their police department. Every single one of them said the same thing. They're a joke. They mishandled this. They mishandled this. They mishandled this. Pretty upset folks out there by the way their police department had treated them.
Picking back up with Sheena's family, it is the later afternoon on January 2nd, and they are still reeling from the news that Sheena had committed suicide. Kelly learned during the call with the medical examiner that they are performing a toxicology test, and it will take 8 to 12 weeks to get the results. Kelly insists on going to the medical examiner's office to see Sheena's body, but they refuse this request, stating that they do not have a, quote, viewing facility. No one has yet positively identified Sheena's body, and I asked Kelly about this.
Part we're in disbelief that this is what's happening, that they're saying she's gone. I said, well, we want to see her. We want to see her. I don't want you to touch her or do anything until we see her. And I'm explaining we should be able to identify her. We should have that right. And they said, no, we don't have a viewing facility. We can't let you do that. And I couldn't for the life of me understand why they couldn't, if they don't have a viewing facility, set up a room for us to see her in. Let us see her. They wouldn't oblige that request by any means.
The next day, Saturday, January 3rd, and as Genoese continues to stay at Kelly's home, Sheena's 2 dogs, or babies as Kelly sometimes calls them, need to be picked up from Animal Services, where they were taken on January 1st. They were closed for the holiday, and this was the soonest her family could get to them.
Dave's, Sheena's dad's girlfriend, his mother had flew into town with him, and my mother. My husband was taking care of working on arrangements and things like that. So Genoese was the only one to drive, so we all went to pick up the babies. The poor things were put in a pound, and we couldn't get them due to them being closed around the holiday. So it was several days that they were stuck in this huge cage, soaking wet, scared to death. And the only one capable of driving at that point was Genoese.
After they pick up Sheena's dogs, Kelly and Dave want Genoese to take them to the hotel where him and Sheena had stayed. They also wanted to go to the Beach House restaurant where Sheena was last seen the night before she died.
I wanted to see where they stayed, what the hotel looked like. I wanted to go to the beach house where she just was, where she was just last, enjoying her life, and also where she was getting married. So I was very much in a lot of turmoil. So I just wanted to be where she was. When we stopped at the hotel, I stopped in the office to introduce myself, and they told me that they had a few of Sheena's things that were left behind, and it was really it was some clothes that were in drawers, but we barely got anything back. There was nothing of the dogs, their dog blanket that's being shown in crime scene photos, all their treats, their toys, just many things that didn't end up getting returned to us. And I don't think that was the hotel, because they were kind enough to give us what they did have still left in the room.
Later that day, Sheena's family realizes that Genoese is in possession of Sheena's keys to her apartment. At the time, no one could understand how he had these items. Detective Diaz did not think this was a big deal and never questioned Genoese about it. We know from the 911 call that Genoese took these when he left, but at the time, Detective Diaz didn't even know there was a 911 call, even though he was in possession of Sheena's phone and was obviously looking through it when he accidentally dialed Kelly. That 911 call you heard in the previous episode was not discovered by the Bradenton Beach police, but instead by Kelly. I will talk more about this later. I did have Kelly talk about Genoese's behavior and what she heard about him in the days after Sheena's death.
he would come and go pretty frequently from the house. He never did explain how he got her keys, why he had them. I do know that he was going over there. I had spoken to one of the neighbors who witnessed that he was going there and removing things from her apartment.
After Genoese finally gives the keys to Kelly, the family goes to Sheena's apartment and looks around, trying to make sense of this painful situation. And while they visit the apartment, Genoese is seen with a friend named Austin Post going to see a movie.
And that's when we went over there and looked around her apartment, where we found her January rent check was on the counter to pay when she returned. We noticed that there wasn't anything of Genoese's in her room. We noticed that his things were in the spare room bedroom, and there was 2 full baths. His things were also in the bathroom. So these items were not mingled together like as though they were residing there by any means.
The next day, January 4th, after many back and forths with the medical examiner's office, Sheena's family can finally see her body for themselves after making arrangements with the local funeral home in Tampa. When the family sees Sheena, she is fully wrapped in plastic material with only her face exposed. Kelly talks about this experience and what she noticed.
So they ended up arranging for her to be brought to another funeral home that was close to our home, not the one where she was actually going to be having her services, but as a courtesy, one that was close to our home that we didn't have to drive very far. And we go in to see her, and they have her all wrapped up, and the only thing that we can see is her face. There's like this material and plastic that's around most of her head, only exposing her face. And that is when I remember it was very upsetting to me because I could see a bruise on the bridge of her nose. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this bruise from? And I pointed it out to her dad, and one of the workers at the funeral home said, well, it's probably just from the autopsy. You know, the autopsy is very invasive. And I'm thinking to myself, you don't bruise after you've already been dead. It was not marked in the autopsy, but it was there. This was literally right across the bridge of her nose. So if you were to, say, look at her 2 eyes, just a little bit lower down, right on the bridge of her nose, there was the bruise.
After seeing Sheena's body, the family has had enough for the day and go back to Kelly's home. At the Bradenton Beach Police Department, however, and while the family is viewing Sheena's body, Officer Basil and Security, who responded to the calls from other hotel guests the morning of January 1st, finally filed their report about their interaction with Sheena, a full 3 days after it happened. When they filed their reports, they were still not aware that Sheena had made her own 911 call to her home county sheriff's office. The police report Sheena twice stated she filled out in her 911 call is never filed. I had Sal and Ira talk about why Sheena's report was never filed and what was said in the report by Officer Basil and Security.
Yeah, just what she said verbally, but there's nothing in writing from her. And this is what I argue about all the time with attorneys when we get called in as experts. Ira, I'm sure, runs into this all the time, is police reports. They either filled out it or not. Follow-up investigation is not someone saying someone said this. Like you and I talking, and I tell Ira, well, Joe said this. That's hearsay. That's not a person's statement. A person makes a statement in person, on tape, or in writing. And every time I get into this discussion with follow-up, a follow-up is not a phone call where someone tells you something and you write in the report what they said. If they said something significant, then you need to go over there and get it in writing or put it on a tape recorder on the phone when you're on the phone with them. And this is constant with police departments. I followed up. I did this. They didn't do a damn thing. I mean, this case is so wrongfully investigated to determine it to be a suicide. It's a shame. It really is.
See, they put in their police report that Sheena had told them that in the course of the argument, Joe had been flinging his arms around, and somehow that's when her finger got hurt, and that's when her neck was injured. But that in itself is domestic violence, and by not taking any action is led to Sheena's death.
The following day, January 5th, becomes an important day in the family's investigation into what happened to Sheena, and when they start to doubt that Sheena had committed suicide. Sheena's father, Dave Morris, and Genoese go to the Bradenton Beach Police Department to pick up Sheena's things, including her suitcase and jewelry. I asked Dave about this trip and the interaction between Detective Diaz and Genoese.
We went to Bradenton Beach Police Department, had Sheena's suitcase, and they had her pocketbooks had already been put inside of her suitcase. But from there, we had to go to Manatee County Sheriff's Department, and from there, we picked up Sheena's jewelry because they have a evidence vault, I believe it is, and the items were supposedly going to be secure there, where Bradenton Beach Police Department didn't have any kind of a secure vault for holding things like that. So Manatee County Sheriff's had all of Sheena's jewelry, diamonds, whatever they were on her, as far as her necklace and earrings and bracelet, and I believe her ring itself. Two different stops down there to pick up the other items. Well, the only thing that Bradenton Beach Police Department had asked Joe for when he was there was the key to the hotel room, because they didn't want to have to change the locks in the hotel room, and the hotel was requesting Bradenton Beach to get that key back from Genoese. And at that time, he explained to them that he never had a key to Sheena's room or to the hotel room. Sheena had the key. There was only one, and she had it. That was the only thing I remember them talking to Genoese about. They wanted that hotel key back.
When they picked up Sheena's things, the family was not aware of either the reported disturbance nor the 911 call. But when they found out, they were confused as to why the Bradenton Beach Police Department released Sheena's personal items to Genoese. He was not related and should not have had any claim to them. Also, during the conversation with Detective Diaz, Genoese is overheard by Dave stating that there was only one hotel room key and Sheena was in possession of it. This satisfies Detective Diaz. I asked Sal and Ira if this was normal police protocol and why the Bradenton Beach Police Department would release these items to Genoese.
If it was Sheena's personal property, it should have never went back to Joe Genoese. It should have went directly to the family. If it belonged to Joe Genoese and a real investigation had been complete, I mean a real one, where they were actually able to eliminate any kind of foul play, then you release evidence. But you don't release anything in 5 days. I can't remember any case that I worked on that was a death involved that I released evidence for probably months once we determined it was a suicide or an accident. And that was only after the state attorney said to us, yeah, you can release it now. We don't have a case to file. We just didn't release things. This place is like a wholesale police department. I've never seen such unprofessional work in my life. That's the word I'm going to use, just unprofessional work.
You know, if you really think about it, when there's items there, if there were money, a purse, house keys, Genoese had no connection to her other than he was allegedly her fiancé. He had no claim to that. The only ones that had a legal claim would be her children, and she didn't have any, or her mother, who received some of it. They were out of line, absolutely, to give anything back to Genoese. Period.
As soon as Dave and Genoese arrive back at Kelly's home, Dave gives a suitcase to Kelly. She eagerly places it in the middle of the family room on the floor. The people present at the time are Kelly, Dave, Sheena's stepfather, Dave's girlfriend, both Sheena's grandmothers, and Genoese. Kelly unzips the suitcase and begins to look inside to try and find any clues as to what has happened to Sheena. Kelly explains this experience.
I'm in the house with a suitcase, and immediately we want to go through it to see, okay, is there a note? Is there something? Is there any sort of clue? Is there something? We need some answers, you know? So Dave and Lisa and I, we put the suitcase on the center of the family room floor, and we start going through Sheena's things. We take Sheena's purse that was in her suitcase out of there, and I'm like, what the heck? Her purse is just completely empty. Her wallet was in there, but that was basically empty. Um, her purse looked just like mine. There'd be receipts in there. There'd be all kinds of things in there. And her purse was very unusually empty. Um, I did find in there I had lifted up this Mickey Mouse key, just a single key, but she would always like kind of do these cute character keys. And so I lifted it up. I knew what it was. I knew it was the spare key to her apartment because if I would watch the dogs for her, that would be the key that I would use. So I held that key up and I asked Genoese, I said, do you know what this is to? And he said no. And I knew he probably didn't because she wouldn't have given it to him. And so we go through all the things, and there was really nothing really very glaring. I did see that the hotel key, which is a regular key, not one of those cards, has a seahorse keychain on it. So, not that I'm brilliant or anything, but I could pretty much tell what that was. That was the key to the hotel.
After finding the hotel key that Detective Diaz asked Genoese about earlier that day, they continue to look through her wallet and only find $7. Dave is stunned by this and angrily stares at Genoese, who is standing behind everyone by the kitchen counter, barely speaking. Genoese had told Dave he had left Sheena $100 to $150. Dave talks about this and confronting Genoese about it.
He swears up and down that he said, I don't know exactly how much I left her, Dave, but I believe it was $100, $150. She had money. I said, Joe, there's $7 in here. He said, I don't know what happened to money. There was at least $100 in there. I thought it was about $150 that she had. That was his explanation.
After looking through Sheena's things for about 45 minutes, they pack up her belongings and move everything to Kelly's room. Dave walks back into the kitchen. He looks at the counter where Genoese had been standing and is stunned by what he sees. I'll let Kelly and Dave tell this story.
Well, we had put all of Sheena's stuff away. Sheena's mom had got a little nervous, and she said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be touching any of this stuff and going through Sheena's stuff. So I'm putting everything away. We're going to close the suitcase up in her pocketbook, everything's staying together. And she takes the suitcase, everything, and she puts it in her bedroom. And it had to be probably within 10 or 15 minutes of that. I just happened to be in the kitchen getting a glass of water, and Genoese is in the kitchen, leaning over the counter, watching over everybody in the room. And I had looked down, and I picked up a keychain with the seahorse on it. And I looked at Sheena's mom, Kelly, and I said, I thought you were going to put all this stuff away. This is sitting right here on the counter. I thought you put everything back in the suitcase, pocketbook, everything, and put it all away. And she said, I did.
It was pretty much where Genoese was sitting. So the kitchen was a wide open kitchen with a center island, and the room that he was staying in was off to the far side of that island, just on the other side of the island, the kitchen. And when Sheena's father sees this key with a seahorse keychain on the counter, I could just see the veins coming out of his neck. He was so angry. He was ready to kill Genoese. And I'm like, wait a minute. Everybody just settle down for a minute. Let me go back into Sheena's suitcase and make sure that key that was in her purse is still in there. that we didn't somehow take it out and set it down. So I go in, I check the suitcase, open it up, get into her purse, and that seahorse keychain with the key is still there. So now mysteriously, the second key shows up on the counter, and it's absolutely impossible that it arrived there any other way than Joe Genoese ditching the key at an appropriate moment after he said he didn't have it, and he put it there. There's the only explanation, and there's no other way around it. We did not find two keys. We only found one, and he had the other key.
Genoese has insisted from day one that he never had a key for the hotel room, to Detective Diaz and to the family. So Kelly contacts the hotel to see how many keys were signed for, and their response was 2 keys, and they had the documentation to prove it. Kelly provided this documentation to the Archangels of Justice, and it is available on their website. Kelly then contacts Detective Diaz to ask him a few questions and tell him about the other hotel room key, and this was his response.
I contacted Detective Diaz after the second key was found. So when we determined that Sheena's hotel key was still in her belongings and the second one appeared, I called Detective Diaz and said, who inventoried Sheena's belongings? And he said he did. And I asked him, how many keys on a seahorse keychain were in her purse? And he said 1. I said, that was the hotel key you were looking for. He said, oh, I didn't know that. But so right there proves that key, there is no way for us to have obtained that key. He saw that key in there. Diaz didn't know it was the hotel key, but he inventoried her belongings and confirmed that there was only one in Sheena's belongings.
As Kelly's on the phone with Detective Diaz, Kelly tells Dave that the Bradenton Beach police only found 1 key in Sheena's stuff. Dave immediately confronts Genoese.
Denied it to everybody who was standing right there. It was like, obviously it's a blatant lie that where did this key just come from? It wasn't there all day or anything, obviously, but Kelly put everything away, key included, and then this other one appears on the countertop. So he's the only one that he had it in his pocket, and I'm sure he took it out, and I don't know why he would have put it on the counter. That was just as dumb as denying that he had one.
Kelly then tells Detective Diaz about there being 2 keys, and even though he asked Genoese about them earlier in the day, he now does not think it is that big of a deal and tells her it doesn't mean anything. Why would Detective Diaz not care that Genoese lied about being given 2 sets of keys when Sheena and him checked in? Then, one of those keys magically showing up on Kelly's counter when Genoese was in the house. This means someone had access to re-enter that hotel room. And then why would Genoese lie about there only being 1 set? Guilt? Amnesia? This other set of keys should have raised some alarms with the Bradenton Beach police, and at least led to a phone call from Detective Diaz to Genoese asking about it. After Kelly gets off the phone, she goes into her garage and sits down by herself, trying to comprehend the last few days and think about the chain of events. Everything had happened so fast that she hadn't had time to think. A little while later, Kelly asks her husband to have Genoese come to the garage so she can speak with him. Here is how that conversation went.
I basically sat him down. Well, I was actually in my garage. I stepped out of the house because I was having a difficult time. Just the house, the way it was set up was the pool was right there, and that's where I would see Sheena and her dogs playing. And so I went out in the garage, and my husband came out to check on me. And so I had asked my husband, I said, do me a favor, tell Joe to grab himself a cigar, make a stiff one, and come out here. I want to talk to him. So my husband went in and told him, and he wasn't coming out. So I went in and I yelled for him. Sat him down and I said, Genoese, I'm going to tell you something right now. Sheena did not commit suicide. I know it, and you know it. And he goes, what do you think happened? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to find out. That's with or without your help. I am going to find out what happened to her. And he got a bit huffy with me. He didn't really like what he was hearing too much. And then he said, well, if you want, you can use my private investigator. I said, no, that won't happen.
Kelly had grown suspicious of Genoese, yet he was still staying at Kelly's house during this time. I thought that was very strange, so I asked Kelly about it.
It's interesting. I think it was a little of both. I think he was keeping an eye on me, and I was keeping an eye on him. I think that he felt that if he stayed, then he knows what's going on. What am I up to? What's my next move?
The next day, January 6th, is the first of 2 services for Sheena. Sheena had been in Tampa, Florida for the last 4 years and made many friends. But she also had a lot of friends and family in upstate New York, and there would be a second memorial there. Hundreds of people were coming through the doors, and it seemed as though no one was leaving after they paid their respects. I asked Kelly how Sheena's friends were reacting to the news of her suicide.
Every single person was just like, you've got to do something about this. They're saying, no, don't lay her to rest. You need a second autopsy. And everyone was telling me that. And that's really what I wanted to do.
Many friends and family noticed Genoese's demeanor was very strange at the memorial. First off, not one of Genoese's friends or business associates showed up. Well, one of Genoese's employees showed up, walked into Sheena's memorial service, said nothing to the family, talked to Genoese for a minute, then left. And while this is not extraordinary in and of itself, there were other unusual behaviors that were either witnessed or reported to Kelly and Dave.
Like everyone was watching Genoese. And there was one of my friends who said that she felt like she was being checked out, looked up and down and checked out, like he was checking out other women and her. He was walking around acting like he was hosting a gala. He had his fancy sunglasses up on top of his head. He's walking around greeting people, asking people if he'd like anything to drink. Just very odd for the funeral services. And then at one point, I see this guy come in like his paint clothes. He walks down like a side aisle, goes up to Genoese. Genoese walks up off to the side. This guy hands Genoese something and leaves. So it's pretty well determined it's one of Genoese's employees. However, this employee doesn't even stop to pay his condolences or anything like that. But whatever it was he had to deliver must have been pretty important to interrupt memorial services for my daughter.
Joe was wearing a pair of sunglasses on top of his head, walking around, shaking hands, talking. I think he was hosting a party almost. Down to the dinner afterwards, he had paid for everybody to go to an Italian restaurant, his favorite Italian restaurant, and buying food and drinks for everybody. And it was just like he was hosting a party. He wasn't upset at all, as far as I saw.
After a conversation with one of Sheena's friends, Dave looks up, and what he sees really sets him off. Genoese is again standing over Sheena's body on his phone, sending texts.
Actually having to go over and tell Joe probably 3 times to stop texting over Sheena. I mean, here she is laid to rest in a casket, and he's standing there with his sunglasses once again on top of his head, and he's standing over Sheena, and he's texting on his phone. He had already been warned about it twice, and I had told Kelly when I saw him do it a 3rd time. And I told Kelly, I said, you better go over there and tell him if I see him texting over Sheena's body one more time, I said, I'm going over there and I'm knocking the motherfucker out. Get him out of here. Kelly had walked over and told him And he put his phone away and walked away from the casket. He turned around and looked at me because Kelly must have told him that I said something. But that was the third time that I had seen him standing over Sheena texting. If I remember correctly, he was in constant contact with his children, and that's who he was contacting, supposedly. I don't know for sure, but I mean, obviously you can take a break for 3 or 4 hours during your fiance's services to maybe not text your children. They're fine. They're home with their mother in Florida, and there's no reason for it.
After the services, Genoese holds a gathering for a few close friends and family at his favorite Italian restaurant. Kelly spends much of the time talking to people about his behavior and how Sheena would have never committed suicide. One friend that came on Genoese's behalf was Austin Post. Not even his roommate or his roommate's wife showed up. They were very close with Sheena, and Kelly was upset that they hadn't come and confronted them about this later.
When I had spoken with Genoese's roommates at the time that were staying at his townhome, I had asked them, because I had met them before, two really very nice people. One it was Genoese's not only roommate, but another one of his employees and his wife. And obviously they moved out. They weren't getting along very well, but at the time they were living there. And I had just simply asked Marcos, or it might have been his wife Brenda, why they didn't attend Sheena's services, because they knew her and Sheena liked them, and I couldn't understand. And they explained to me that they wanted to go, but Genoese told them, no, these services are very private and family only, not even allowing them to go, which that was the farthest thing from the truth there was.
Also, Genoese never mentions to them how Sheena died. They find out 2 weeks later when talking to another friend. During that time, Genoese did not show much emotion when talking about Sheena and seemed to just move on with his life. It is now January 7th, and Kelly, Dave, Sheena's grandmother from New York, and Dave's girlfriend fly to upstate New York with Genoese. Sheena's stepfather made arrangements so that Sheena would be on the same flight with her mother and father. Kelly and Dave were able to watch how carefully the people at JetBlue transferred their daughter from one plane to another. The second leg of the flight was terrible, with turbulence like Kelly had never experienced.
My husband had arranged for Dave, Lisa, Sheena's grandmother Morris on Dave's side, and myself to fly to New York with Sheena's body. And Genoese flies with us. My husband and Sheena's other grandmother, my mother, they drove so that they could bring my golden retriever and all the picture boards and everything from the other service, so we didn't have to remake everything again. And that was a very rough flight when we were on that flight. So we've got Sheena's body there on that plane with us, and we hit the worst turbulence that I had ever experienced in my life. And I was so scared, I thought we were going down. And when this happens, the flight attendant who's walking down the aisle carrying all these bottled waters falls right into Genoese's lap. And he's laughing, and I'm scared to death. And I'm just like, this is Sheena. She does not want him going to New York.
Most of Sheena's family lives in upstate New York, along with many of her close friends. Genoese is forewarned that no one in upstate New York would be rolling out the red carpet for him. In the evening, Genoese accompanies Kelly to her brother's home. When Kelly arrives and explains the chain of events that led to Sheena's death to her family, Genoese eagerly agrees that something else must have happened to Sheena, and never mentions anything about Sheena being crazy that night. But he then proceeds to tell Kelly's sister this.
That night, as we got off the airplane, my sister had picked us up at the airport, and we went back to my brother's house. And it was then that he says that to my sister, that he heard that you could hit someone over the head with a phone book and it go undetected to knock them out. It's just kind of a bizarre thing to say um, right then and there. She's she's upset, one, because he's there. Um, and I explained to Genoese, I said, look, I said, you're, because he was going to my family's too. And I said, look, they're not going to welcome you with open arms. You going up to New York, I don't think anybody's going to welcome you with open arms. And he's like, whatever. He didn't seem to care.
The next morning, on January 8th, Kelly gets a call from the medical examiner's office with the results from the toxicology test. She's informed that Sheena's alcohol level is below the legal limit. This was concerning to the medical examiner's investigator because suicides, especially with younger victims, usually involve elevated amounts of alcohol or drugs. But what concerned Kelly was how quickly the toxicology results came back.
Exactly 1 week after we learned of Sheena's death, um, I'm actually in the hotel and I'm trying to make phone calls to see if we can get a second autopsy. And we're, you know, preparing funeral arrangements and things like that. And I get the phone call from the medical examiner to call me about the toxicology. And I was absolutely puzzled by this because they told me that it would take 8 to 10 weeks before those toxicology reports come back. And then they explained to me that, you know, what her levels were, and she was under the legal limit for alcohol. First thing is like, well, gosh, you know, that was New Year's, so she was barely even like partying it up on New Year's, you know, for a 22-year-old girl. Um, it's but I believe I had also called Diaz, and I don't know what time frame that was, but I was very concerned that one, how did we get this back so quickly? And he didn't even know about it yet, and everything everything was just getting worse and worse. But the medical examiner had said that they had used a new lab, and they were able to get them done quicker. That's when I found out why. But go to Michael Jackson. How long does that take? Here he is, a famous person, and it still takes that long.
Later in the afternoon, Dave, Kelly, Dave's girlfriend, and Genoese go to the funeral home and the cemetery to make arrangements for Sheena's burial. During this time, Kelly has to leave the room frequently to take and make calls regarding a second autopsy. After much discussion, Sheena's family decides against a second autopsy. Kelly talks about why and what she has learned since.
When we were at the funeral home trying to make arrangements, I kept leaving. I kept leaving the room because I was making calls to um, an attorney that I knew, and I was trying to find a way to get a second autopsy done. And when I went back in the room, and I'm doing this, and Genoese knows I'm doing it, I'm just not allowing them to hear my conversations. That's why I kept leaving the room. Um, Finally, when I get back in, the funeral director explains to me, Kelly, it's probably there's probably nothing left to look at after she's been embalmed and this time has lapsed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And so that's when everything stopped and we proceeded to go ahead and make the arrangements to lay her to rest. Now, had I known what I've learned after all these years, I would have never done that. For some reason, we all seem to think that when your loved one passes that you have to immediately make all these arrangements and go through these things when you don't even have a clear enough head. There is no reason to rush anyone's service or to bury them. And I wish I could stress that most to so many people. And people think, well, I don't have to worry about that because nothing's ever going to happen to my daughter or my son. And people go ahead and they make arrangements for cremation or just to lay them to rest for as soon as possible. And you should really just wait until you've got the answers that you're satisfied with. But I didn't learn that until the hard way.
After this trying day, Sheena's family goes back to the hotel. By this time, and after driving from Tampa to upstate New York, Sheena's stepfather, other grandmother, and Kelly's golden retriever Jake finally arrive safe but exhausted. The next day, January 9th, a second service is held for Sheena. At the memorial service, there is a memory table set up so that friends can place things on the table that remind them of Sheena. Unexpectedly, though, an incident occurs between Genoese and Sheena's good friend Justina, or Juddy as Sheena called her, as she places a photo of her and Sheena on the table. In the photo was one of Sheena's ex-boyfriends, named Sal, who Sheena had dated in July or August of 2008, just a few months earlier. Dave and Kelly talk about what happened.
I thought he had even taken the photo and folded it over or something to that effect. I know there was something about that photo, and it was with Sheena and a different guy. And I don't know if he had folded the picture over or if he actually did want Juddy to cut the picture out of there, but I do remember that.
In this photo was a picture of Sheena, Juddy. They call her Juddy, but her name's Justina. And Sheena's ex-boyfriend, Sal. Well, they were all friends. So this was a really important memory to Juddy. And Genoese went over to her and told her to take that picture off the memory table. Now, I just want to paint this picture. This is a man, 45 years old, at a 22-year-old services. And he's telling Sheena's friend to remove this picture because her old boyfriend is in it. She said that she's not taking it off the memory table. So he goes to the funeral director's office and asks for scissors and brings the scissors to Juddy and asks her to cut him out of the picture if she's going to leave the picture there. And she did not do that, obviously. But that is a very bizarre thing to do to one of Sheena's best friends who's in so much disbelief, so much pain, and he's worried about a photograph on the memorial table.
During the services, Sheena's family was very emotional. Kelly could not stop crying and was trying to pull herself together. But for Sheena's family, every person that came in to show their respect was another memory and more pain. While Kelly is talking to one of Sheena's friends, she begins crying, and this is how Genoese responds.
I am crying, and I can't stop crying because that's my daughter laying there in that casket. That was really difficult to go through two services, and probably each one of them may have been, 4 hours long. It was just awful to see your daughter there. So I'm crying, and I can't stop crying. And Genoese turns to me and says, "You need to stop. That's not good for you." And I'm like, "What? What? You're telling the mother to stop crying? Oh my gosh."
After the services, Kelly, her husband, and Genoese go to dinner. It has been a long day for them. At the dinner table, Kelly remembers Genoese smiling and communicating without a hint of grief. After dinner, everyone goes to their hotel rooms for some much-needed rest. The next day, on January 10th, Sheena is laid to rest. Genoese instructs the funeral director to bury Sheena with most of her jewelry they picked up from the Bradenton Beach police, including the engagement ring. After the services, there's another gathering held by Sheena's uncle. Many of the people there had questions regarding Sheena's death and insist it must be investigated further. Early the next morning on January 11th, Genoese abruptly parts ways with Sheena's family. As he is leaving, he sees Kelly in the lobby and tells her then that he has to leave because he needs to go to work. Kelly talks about Genoese's departure.
I can't remember when he booked that flight, but I know he didn't have it booked prior to leaving. I think that he just up and left. And that what's very odd about that is, so if you know you're leaving that next morning, then you would think that he would have gone to Sheena's dad and said, "Look, I've got to head back to work tomorrow. I've got to, I've got things to do." But he never does that. He doesn't say goodbye to him. He doesn't do anything other than hop on a plane and leave.
On January 12th, Dave, Kelly, Dave's girlfriend, Sheena's grandmother, Kelly's husband, and golden retriever Jake make the long drive back to Tampa to pack up Sheena's apartment. That's where we're going to leave off for this week. Next week, we will talk about what Sheena's family found in the weeks following her death, and Kelly finally getting the SunPass and phone records from Genoese. A special thanks to Mike Mack, who did all the music for this podcast. If you'd like to hear more samples of Mike Mack's work, you can go to his website, www.mike-mack.com, or you can follow him on Twitter @MikeMack. I'd like to give another thank you to our sponsors Blueberry and TotalFrontPage.com. Please support them as they have supported this podcast. If you're interested in learning more about this case, you will soon be able to find all the evidence and documentation used in this podcast at archangelsofjustice.org. For updates about future episodes and cases, follow us on Twitter @ArchangelPod or on Facebook under Archangels of Justice. Thank you, and we look forward to having you here next week for episode 3 of the Sheena Morris case.